of course, last night we had a total lunar eclipse. So I thought I should make a devotion to the moon with Claire de Lune.
There's all the video signatures.
For those of you here on ground, we're going to start something tonight that was not going to happen online. We're going to have the meeting after the meeting reinstituted again. After the meeting, instead of standing around in the cold and talking together, we get in your car and we drive to Norms, which is that way on Catella. So you drive that way, turn right on Catella, and Norms is on.
Sorry, Kim, please continue.
Oh, sure. That one's Clair de Lune by Claude Debussy. And a little Celtic music. Okay. I'm gonna go to the Ash Grove. It's by Lori Riley. I play a Lion and Haley Prelude lever 40 harp, so I change notes by changing levers. So I gotta make sure the right levers are at. Miss O Carolyn.
That was really lovely, Kim. I think we're right about at 7:30. Well,
Hey, thank you. Happy Pi Day.
you can do it in 1 minute. Happy Pi Day to you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was beautiful as always. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Always a pleasure.
Yeah. Well, everybody, welcome to the March meeting of Orange County Astronomers. I am your current president, in case you haven't figured that out, and I'm delighted you're all here. I'm sorry I can't be in person in Irvine Auditorium at Chapman, but I'm up in Northern California at the moment. We were trying to chase the lunar eclipse and actually got to see it, and I hope that a lot of you did too. A couple of things before I turn this over to Kyle Graham for the announcements. We have started the fire clearance work on the ANZA site. If you go out there, you will see quite a few differences. By the time we're done, we should have a pretty fire resistant site, much more easily defended. You know, for those that like the greenery, I'm sorry that you're not going to have that, but we all, I think, would prefer to have a fire hazard. And that was the calculation we had to make. Also, we have another great event in the club. As you may remember, March was the last paper edition of the series Astronomer. Please remember to check out the electronic version. Yeah, there will be a copy online, and I believe that you should be getting notices to remind you to check it out, and some may be receiving them actually by email directly from Charlie. I'm told by Dave Fisher that the taking advantage of the new format, the new edition, the April edition, will be actually longer than the paper edition generally is, with more information and a lot of great stuff for everybody to enjoy. So with that, I will turn it over to Kyle to tell us all the rest of the announcements for the club. Welcome, Kyle. It's good to see you again.
Hello. Let me get started. All right. Here we go. Welcome, new members. You'll be able to find your name badges if you're there in person on the whiteboard. If you're not attending in person, attending online, they'll be mailed to you in the coming months. For those of you available in person, coffee, donuts, and water are available for purchase up in the lobby. Enjoy. There will be a Pi Day contest that will be happening later. Whoever can recite the most digits of pi correctly wins the pie. Doug will be hosting that. The next star party is March 29th at ANZA. The next astrophysics meeting is March 21st. The next beginners class is April 4th, and the next board meeting is March 9th. You can find all the information about the upcoming club events on the OCA website. Speaking of the March 29th star party at ANZA, that will be the weekend of the Messier Marathon, so please plan to participate. Mark your calendars. It should be a fun time. Please remember that the Adopt Scope program is up and running. You can find more information on the website as shown here. You can see a sample inventory, sample adoption agreement, and a lot more information there. Martin Christensen is our outreach coordinator, and please feel free to reach out to him if you would be willing to volunteer at any of these upcoming outreach events. They're always a fun time, so if you're willing to volunteer, please reach out to him. We would love to have the help and be able to bring astronomy to kids at schools and the public in general. Any items of interest that you might like featured in the series Astronomer, please send those to Dave Fisher. We're always looking for new content for the newsletters. Some items that we look for are articles, images, trip reports, observations, etc. Please send him any items of interest. Friendly reminder that if you are out at the ANZA site, if you're the last one there, to lock up the ANZA house, ensure it's all the windows are closed, doors are locked, etc., so no critters get in. And please close the gate to the site when you depart to ensure the site stays secure. As we were talking about fire mitigation earlier, please help with weed clearing wherever that's needed when you're out there. Especially please keep your pad clear, and please help in the common areas as well. We have a full moon tonight. The next general meeting will be April 11th, and I'll turn it over to, I think Doug is going to do the Pi Day contest before the John Garrett with the WhatsApp presentation, if I'm correct.
Actually, to be on. Hi, can people hear me? It doesn't seem like it's very
You're all
loud.
good, Helen. We can hear you.
Great. Actually, it's me going to be doing the pie thingy. So Doug's going to help. So we're going to, I got somebody's elbow on the screen. All we have to do is to, okay. Our technical wizard, Sam, is working on trying to get it so that you can see us. Okay. I'm going to turn this. Is that okay? Okay. So 10 years ago, it wasn't just Pi Day, but it was Pi Day of the century. So today's the 10th anniversary of 3.1415. And so if it's possible to put up the slide at the beginning of the announcements that had the picture of Doug eating the pie.
Yes, I will do that. Give me
I'll
1
do it.
second.
We're not seeing.
I'm working on it.
We're doing a little technical. So what that shows was that was our
There you
Pi
go.
Day. There we go. Okay. And Doug has a short little story about the Pi Day of the century. And then I would like anybody who knows any digits of pi, which probably everybody at least knows 3, to come down. And we're going to have a contest to see who knows the most. And the winner is going to get a little pie from Catella Deli. Okay, and then Reza's got some other exciting things planned for the people online, but for you folks down here who came all the way, you can have an actual pie. So after he reads the story, please come down. Don't make me look like a fool being the only one down here. And so there's, I got him. Okay, so there's the camera, and here is Doug.
And I can be in the contest, but I can't win. I'm on the board. Oh, because you don't want me to win. Okay, all right. Okay, this is a story I wrote about about the pi of the century, which was 3.141592653. Okay, and next century we'll get a little different, the same number. I think I heard about it on Facebook. It was going to be a once-in-a-lifetime Pi Day that we should all celebrate on March 14, 2015 at 9:23 and 56 seconds, we figured in the morning. We should have captured the first 10 digits of the number pi in an instant of time that would have to satisfy us until the next century or longer. If the 56 seconds residue was expressed as a decimal, then we could synchronize the numbers almost infinitely, although it would be difficult to measure them beyond the 15th digit. While having the right equipment to do so in my home laboratory, an oscilloscope with delayed triggering, it looked like my experience was going to be elsewhere. We had planned a trip to Fairbanks, Alaska for that week to see the aurora borealis and to do a little dog mushing. We were going to stay in a deluxe log cabin out of town called a Moose in the Garden. My sole source of time synchronization would have to be my watch. To be fair, it's not an ordinary watch. It has 5 timing receivers built into it that receive radio signals and adjust it every night. And the crystal oscillator in the watch provides more than enough accuracy during the day to keep it time well within a second of national standards. Well, we saw the aurora every night, and we went dog mushing and enjoyed having the dogs pull us around on a sled in the snow. In the middle of all the fun, I remembered that I needed a piece of pie for the next day. Or the opportunity of the century would be wasted. Pie, as I found out, is not plentiful in the Arctic. Neither are York patties or Klondike bars. Apparently, they're not needed. We found the northernmost Denny's in the world along a main street. We looked over the menu and we expected to see such Arctic favorites as stinkfin, whale blubber, and seal innards, all more or less served fresh, but we were relieved to find all of Denny's usuals. There was also a listing for an apple pie. Well, we had lunch and ordered a piece of the pie to go, and it was checked and packed. The next day, Helen started setting up to memorialize the pie day of a lifetime. Like a Hollywood director, she sat me down in the kitchen of the log cabin at the table where we had had breakfast, as you see above me. The morning light streamed through the frost-tinged windows, and my slice of yesterday's pie was in front of me on a plate. I took off my watch and carefully observed the sweep of the second hand. I cut a forkful of pie, posed with it at the ready, and Helen had the phone ready to take the picture. As a second swept by, I shoved the pie in my mouth and smiled, accompanied by the digital snap of the camera. Picture caught, pie eaten, 9:26 and 53 seconds, trailed sidereally behind us. We were content that we had celebrated in fine style. With our log cabin framed views of Mount McKinley almost 100 miles away, snow everywhere and frost on the windows, it was indeed a fine and rare day.
Okay, so here it goes. Please come down. Please. Doug has one too, but it's hard for him to see. Come on. Come on. Got Dave. Courtney, I know you know some. Come on. Just even the speaker can join in. Come on. Charlie, I know you know some. I gotta get several people down here to make it a actual contest. All right, got some takers. It's a Catella Deli little apple pie. Anybody been to Catella Deli? They've got really good stuff. Okay, all right. Can you guys all get on this side so you're all in the camera? All right. So yay. All right, give these volunteers applause. Just for participating. All right. So now what I'd like everybody to do, and I've got the thing here to like, oh, by the way, the most digits of pi recorded to be recited was Thomas Ferguson in 2006. Are you ready for this? 3,142,958. He couldn't make it 960 and like round it off or anything, but. Now, if any of you go that far, we have more program to do tonight, so we're going to have to cut you off at 1,500,000. Okay. All right. So please, everybody, we're going to recite it nice and slow and together. And when you are done, you're done, and we'll see who can last the longest. Okay. Ready? Go. 3.
1, 4, 5, 9, 2, 6, 5, 3, 5, 7, 7, 9. I gotta start over again.
I think our winner is Dave Fisher. Yay! But you weren't. Did. All right. All right.
597 973 Don't do that.
All right. All right. Since you can't win anyway, let me see what Martin can do. Go ahead, Martin.
3.141592653589793 More than that, I've tried but can't keep in my memory. 16 decimal places.
That was 16. David, how many did you do? So you got more. Yay! All right. Yeah, you get the pie. This Yes, Don Lynn, who might be online tonight, does it up to 62. So Martin, by the way, is our outreach man, as you heard earlier, and so he wins the pie. He has something to say.
We're in the tail end of the outreach year, so there are not too many more opportunities between now and June. We do have one on March 22nd, a Saturday at Del Lago Elementary in Mission Viejo. It's accessed through Los Lisos Boulevard. And the street is Entidad. And we also have 2 outreaches scheduled for Crystal Coast State Park in April and June. Unfortunately, the June one is going to be near full moon. So I'm not sure why they scheduled that. It's supposed to coincide with the Grunion Run. I hear the Grunion Run is related to the moon too. I'm not sure why they would have one at the new moon and one at the full. Maybe it's 2 runs per phase. And then after that, we don't have another one until August, which is at the Mile Square Park Sports Center complex in Fountain Valley. We are open to taking reservations for the next school year, 2025-26. One person has requested a date, but it was November 14th, which coincides with our general meeting that month. So I had to tell her, try November 13th to November 21st. She hasn't gotten back to me yet. So we haven't gotten any official reservations. We've had a couple of people imply that they want to schedule dates for the next year. That's about it.
Thanks very much. Oh, and as coming in second place, you can get a free donut, Dave, if you want to. I'll have it up. I'll have them up there. Reza, were you going to do anything, or are we going to turn it?
Yes, we
Okay.
actually do have a special for online people, and I think our online people can do more than the 6. Was that 16 digits your record on the ground? Helen, was your record 16 digits? We did not hear you.
Yeah, that was 16 down here.
Okay, so here is how it's going to work for the online audience. Those who would like to participate need to just raise their hands, and I'll bring them on the panel, and they will have their video on, and they'll have the opportunity to recite pi digits, as many as they can. And then, since we could not give them any real pies, the prize for online audience would be a VIP ticket to the backstage, where they can have a one-on-one conversation with the speaker of their choice. So with that said, yeah, great. We have some people online who are willing to participate. Anybody else? There's a call here on the ground. I have one person so far. So while others are thinking, okay, Don, I'm going to move you on stage. Okay. Anybody else on the online people on the online side would like to participate? Please raise your hand. Okay, great. We have Don Lynn here. Okay, so Don, we are ready for you whenever you are.
Has anybody got the real answer and know if I'm going to be right or not?
I have it all printed out here. I'm going to watch you carefully.
Oh, okay. 3.14159265358979323 8462664 3383279 0288419771 6939937510 82097494592307. I know some more. Just a second here. 062862089998. I think that's all I've got.
You missed a couple in the middle after the 2307. So, but that
Oh,
was
dear.
a lot.
That would have been 8164. Did I miss saying
Yep.
that?
Yep.
But it is 8164.
Uh-huh.
Okay. I didn't make 80, only made 60 some.
That was excellent. Yay. Give him a round of applause. Raise it. Anybody else online want to
Let's
try?
make another call. Anybody else online would like to participate and recite some digits of pi for a chance to have a one-on-one with the speaker of their choice? So let me congratulate Don. Thank you very much for participating. That was great fun. I also had the pies up here and was confirming. Thank you very much. That was great. And you could be in touch with me to claim your prize unless anybody else volunteers in the next few seconds. I guess not. Okay, thank you very much. So are we ready to continue with the regular programming?
I'm ready.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. John, the floor is yours.
Oh, okay. I hope everyone can see this. Thank you for inviting me out here. When I actually earlier in the week, I thought that the eclipse was tonight. And I thought the reason I was invited to be the What's Up presenter was that I was the only one who didn't realize that the eclipse was tonight, and therefore they could get me easily. But I was quite relieved to find out that the eclipse was last night, except I had to make a lot of calls, tell people which night it really was, because I told a few people that it was Friday night, but that was easy to correct. Anyway, this picture, last night's eclipse, was taken by my daughter through her 11-inch Schmidt Cassegrain, and what you can't quite see in the picture, you might be able to see the bottom of the moon clipped off a little bit. Yes.
John, can you share your screen, please?
Oh, okay. Okay, give me a moment to. Okay, so I'm here. Share. And there. How's that? Is that better? Is that better? Is it shared? Oh, okay, great. Anyway,
yes,
so what I was realizing while I was sitting in the audience, just waiting for this What's Up to talk, is that my daughter's picture fits exactly the field of view of my camera. And I didn't think she'd be able to do that, but it turns out that the only reason she could do that was that the moon was very close to apogee, being farthest away in its orbit. So it'll be some time before she can find another lunar eclipse where she could fit the whole moon in her telescope. But anyway, so I hope all of you got a chance to see the eclipse last night. It was rained out for a lot of us, but there were enough breaks in the rain to make it worth, at least for my daughter, to set up her big telescope. Okay, now I'm not getting an advancing signal. I have to figure out what I've done wrong. Okay, the What's Up images that I'll be showing, I think I took all of the pictures that I'll be showing. And if it looks like a fairly crisp image, I probably photographed it with my 3-inch refractor. I've got at least one image in here that I took with my 8-inch Schmidt Cassegrain, and then most of the wide field images were done with my 24mm single lens reflex camera. But that's what I've been shooting with. So just so you know. So here's a little map of the sky about this time of year, if you can make it up at least to 10 o'clock. And the winter Milky Way, which is fairly faint, does pass overhead. And the ecliptic is about there. So we have a very high ecliptic right now. And the ecliptic, the path that the planets follow, Mars and Jupiter are still sitting fairly high in the evening. Mars has gotten to be quite a small target. And in the last few weeks at star parties, I've had to tell people, well, just look for the color, don't look for detail. So it's getting pretty small, but Jupiter still stands out as a wonderful target throughout the evening. any early in the evening, you may get a glimpse of Venus for a very short time. It's plunging quickly. This picture I took probably 3 weeks ago, and so it's definitely much lower than it is now. But if you do get a chance to see it, or if you don't get a chance to see it, it'll show up in the morning sky within a few weeks. And Mercury should be rising and about with it right now in the evening, and both of those are going to plunge by the end of the month, and then we'll see them in the morning sky in April. And if you do get a chance to see Venus, you might notice a very noticeable crescent Venus. And so it's a good time to even maybe see that with a pair of binoculars. In fact, one of my memories from childhood is taking a pair of binoculars, looking at Venus and going, wow, it looks like the moon. So now's your chance to see that. Here's some pictures I took a couple weeks ago from my backyard. It's still fairly dark in my backyard, and so you've got Orion and Taurus, nice and high in the sky in the early evening, and that object marring Taurus's horn is the planet Jupiter. And then, of course, the Hyades cluster is still out, a good binocular target. And then over here in Orion, some nice targets. M42 is a good visual object as well as imaging object. And then the Horsehead Nebula and Flame Nebula. This would be a good time to get those if you haven't bagged them already as a imaging target. And then if you go a little lower, you'll hit the roof of my house, but right above it is Canis Major. And the M41 cluster, still very bright, a good thing to look at with binoculars or a telescope. And then this picture, I tried to get Jupiter and Mars in the same field of view. So imagine this whole picture turned a little bit sideways, and Jupiter is the bright one up high, and then Mars is out there to the lower left. And here's a picture of Mars about 3 weeks ago when it was making a very nice isosceles triangle. Mars is moved. The bright stars with it are Castor and Pollux, the twins, Gemini. And Mars is moved, so it's more like a right triangle right now that the three objects make. And if you went a little farther past Gemini, you might see Cancer, the crab, also called the Praesepe beehive cluster. And there's a couple areas of the sky that are really prime for viewing now. And so Leo and Ursa Major are up really high in the sky throughout the early evening and, throughout the night, actually. And then over here is an area that's my current project. So I'm going to try to get to that area this month and photograph new images. And so I'm just going to share a little bit of what I'm hoping to find out there. So here's Ursa Major upside down this time of year, as though the Dipper is dumping its water for springtime on the northern hemisphere. And the stars that give that Ursa Major its name are here. And so the bear's upside down, kind of doing a shoulder roll. And here's a bunch of the star names. And some of these objects, the Messiers, this area is rich with Messiers. And I'm not going to show you pictures of all of them for the simple reason I don't have pictures of all of them that I've taken, but I have a few favorites. And so here's M3, and this one's up here up there in the handle, past the handle, that is. The M3, a globular cluster. And then my favorite, the Owl Nebula, and the, what's it? I think I wrote it down, but it's being blocked on my field of view. So I think it's M108. And anyway, so then we got, great, because I actually can't read my labels unless I look up there. Yeah, so M81 and 82, beautiful galaxies. These also were taken, I think both of these were taken with my 3-inch refractor. This was also with a 3-inch refractor, probably from my backyard. And then M51, I'm not sure when I got this, but it's another beautiful object in Ursa Major. And then if you go, okay, Leo, here's Leo, sits very high in the sky. Leo isn't upside down, it's in its nice little reclined pose. And if you draw a line between Denebula and Regulus, you'll see a couple objects there, but just before that's also where Wolf 359, those of you who follow Star Trek will know that that's the place of an epic battle to take place sometime in the future. But I was looking through my star charts once and saw that and thought, oh, how cool to know that. And anyway, if you draw a line between Denebula and Regulus, that takes you very close to other groups of galaxies. And here's one of those groups, M65, 66, and I can't read what I wrote for the last one, but thank you, NGC 3627. And then M95, M96, and It's blocked by my little message here. What M105? Thank you. Getting some really good crowd participation on this. And I really do appreciate it. Anyway, so if you go lower into the south from Leo, you will come to this area that I'm immediately fascinated by. This is the area of the constellations of Canis Major, but to its left, there'll be Puppis and well, it used to be called one big constellation of the Argonaut or something like that, but I'll show you a few things that are in this area. As I mentioned earlier, M41, a couple NGCs. I didn't bring pictures of them tonight. And then, but I did bring one of this one, G Canis Majorum 145. It's a double, a line of sight, I think it's a line of sight double, that has, it's comparable to the famous Albireo star that we get in the summer sky and has a very nice contrasting color. So it's a winter version of Albireo if you want to show people those. And then my favorite planetary nebula, a few nice ones in this area. And then if you wanted to try to look for all the NGCs and various star clusters, there are a lot in there, including NGC 2298, a globular cluster I haven't seen, but it does show up in my pictures when I took a wide field shot here. So I hope to bag those in the next month. And then okay, here's the G145 Canis Majoris, the one that's comparable to the Albireo star of the summer sky. And then here's NGC 2452, and next to it is another NGC 2453. So that makes a nice little photographic pair. This was probably taken with my 8-inch Schmidt-Cassegrain. And now if we go a little bit left of Canis Major, some of these star clusters you can actually see looking at this picture. And so this picture was a 24 millimeter camera lens, and not a very good lens, and but you can actually see a lot of these objects right in it. So here's some of the tracing of the constellations here, the Puppis, the stern of the ship, Vela, the sails. You can almost imagine Puppis being the stern of an old sailing ship. And all these clusters in here, clusters galore, as one might say. And then planetary nebula, and those are a few that I hope to chase down. And also, every now and then I'll read an article of interest and add it to my file where I create these star charts, and then I would discover it, maybe in this case a year and a half later. But I was reading in the October 12th Nature back in 2023 that a star right next to, from our point of view, NGC 2546 is evidence of a planetary collision. Now, you can't see this. You wouldn't see it in a telescope, at least one of our telescopes, but you can say it's there, or at least we believe it's there. And what happened was the All-Sky Automated Survey for Supernova, plus the Wide Field Infrared Survey Explorer, their observations were put together in this paper to describe what they believe is a sun-like star about 300 million years old. So not much like, very similar to ours, but also probably going through a phase of planetary bombardment, planets colliding. And the evidence of that is that when they're looking in the visible and the infrared, normally they would see a bright star in the visible, but then they saw a big spike in the infrared. And then 2.5 years later, both of those signals were reduced. And so something reduced the brightness of the star. So the authors of this paper hypothesize an orbit comparable to Jupiter with 2 Neptune-sized planets in it that probably collided. And then it took about 2 years for the debris field to get over here and block our view of the star. And that's why we then see the star drop. And I did do a little follow-up to see if anyone retracted that paper or proved them wrong, and I hadn't found anything to that effect. So it looks like a reasonable hypothesis for what's going on in that little star we can't see from the ground here, but that we can know what's going on. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, John, for yet another great presentation and great pictures. Thank you very much. So let me go into introducing our speaker at this meeting. Our speaker at this meeting has recently retired from NASA's JPL after an impressive 35-year career contributing to groundbreaking space missions. His work spanned everything from space shuttle experiments and deep space navigation to GPS technology and lunar gravity mapping. Most notably, he played a key role in the communications systems for the historic Mars helicopter Ingenuity. Please join me in welcoming Courtney Duncan. Courtney.
Check. So, if I'm having trouble staying awake because I was up all night watching the eclipse, and I didn't even think, I didn't even realize it was happening until a friend from 50 years ago told me, and he and I up talking on the phone through most of it, up that I thought would be relevant to both you and this talk. How many of you saw or were involved in or knew that there was a transit of Mercury in 1970? I did. So, I was a kid in high school with a paper route. And I was saving money to build a telescope out of parts that you could order out of the Edmund catalog. Anybody remember that? Boy, this is, okay, good. And me and my friend, who I talked to all night last night, we built up telescopes out of mirrors out of the Edmund catalog, but just cardboard tubes. And you know how we did this back when we had nothing but money, but no money but time, a little bit of time. And one of the goals, was to see that transit of Mercury on May 9th, 1970. Now, it turns out that that was barely visible from the United States. The transit would end, so we were in Central Texas, close to Austin. The transit would end about 6:30 in the morning, our time, and sunrise was about 6 on May 9th. And so we made all these preparations, and at 5 in the morning in the dark, we loaded up our bikes with all of our equipment, and we went out in the dusk and set up. And it was a beautiful day, and we could see that the sun was about to rise, and we got everything working, and the sky was completely clear except for a cloud in the east about a half an hour high. And so we're looking at our watch, we're listening to WWV, we're looking at the cloud in the telescope, and about 5 minutes after the transit was over, the sun came up out of the cloud. And, we focused in on it. We could see sunspots. If the thing was working, we would have seen it. And, I don't know if you know the mathematics of this, but transits of Mercury happen very predictably, but they're not very often. And so it was actually 1986 before I actually saw one. So that was one of the first times that I learned something that's relevant here. You set out to do amazing things, and you make great preparations. Sometimes you spend a lot of money, and sometimes you succeed and sometimes you don't. But what you're in it for is a good story. And that is a good story. And so is this. Even though we didn't see the transit, it's a good story, right? All right, so this good story started out kind of like a joke. None of us actually, when we first heard that people at JPL wanted to fly a helicopter on Mars, thought it was a very good idea or even possible. I said the same thing most of the people did. I said, you realize there's not much air there, right? There is air on Mars, and it is a thing, more so than other planets. I mean, Venus has tons of air, literally, and Mars, to be precise, it's kind of like the air at 100,000 feet at Earth. So there's not much there. It's not a regime in which we've done much flying, at least not that we talk about in the unclassified community. And it just seemed crazy. And so I was assigned to work on this. All right, so let me see, the thing's working, but it didn't change. Yeah. So the next slide is all the legal stuff. I'll just tell you, and then we can just slip through it. So I wrote this as an employee of JPL. All of you paid for this work. JPL is very picky about who gets credit and who promises what and blah, blah, blah. And so this all has to be cleared through a publication release process that I went through. And after I retired, I've added a few things to it because things have happened since I retired, but everything I added was in the public domain. So I'm still not clicking. Yeah. Well, okay, I'll use the pointer, but okay. All right, so there was 72 flights out of a required 5. So that was pretty good. And we wouldn't have even gone on this mission if we thought that we were going to arrive in the winter. But we survived a year and a half on Mars, including a winter. And that amazed everybody. In the summer, it's 100 degrees below at night. And in the winter, it's colder. So, okay, next. This is the slide about that. So I've given this talk at ham radio people, and so I put ham radio call signs by a lot of the people who worked on it. Most of the people in my organization, well, about half of them, as you can see, are hams, and that's the kind of person you would have working on radio equipment for deep space use or for Mars surface use or whatever. And let's see if there's anybody. But well, there's me. I was the lead for the subsystem, meaning that I met in meetings with all the leads for all the other subsystems. It's about 20 people. And this was the finest team that I ever worked on, actually. These were people who were very accomplished in their area, camera people and aerodynamic people and motor people, software people. We were all encouraged to say anything we wanted. So I could say, it doesn't look like that landing gear is going to hold together. Does that bother anybody? And, I was a radio guy. I mean, what do I know? But, someone, we would banter about that. And we had a very nice working relationship. And they asked me embarrassing questions too. So go on. So I had to go figure out what a helicopter is. It's an aerial vehicle that can hover. And Earth helicopters, the ones that work in near 1 atmosphere, sea level light conditions here, they have their rotors go a few hundred revolutions per second. There's so little air on Mars that we designed for 2,800, and we ended up optimizing at 2,585. So that's a much higher rate. It means the balance is much more delicate. The way a helicopter is controlled is there's 2 things you can do to the blades, and I think this is better in the next slide. Yeah. So the way it works, and the way it works on this helicopter is you spin it up to a certain speed without doing anything. You're sitting there on the ground, the blades are going, you're counting revolutions, you know that it's the right speed, now you're ready to go. When you're ready to take off, you put in a little bit of what's called collective, which means that you pitch up the blades uniformly. It doesn't matter where they are, you just pitch them all up, and that gives a little bit of lift, and then you pick up. And when you want to go down, when you're up, you take a little bit of collective out so that you can come down. The way that you turn or that you bank is you put in what's called cyclic. And there's a thing that we'll see in upcoming slides. There's a thing called the swash plate. that you tilt around. The swash plate is a fixed object, but the blade pitch is keyed to the position and the tilt of the swash plate. And so you tilt the swash plate a certain way, and as the blade goes around, it changes pitch with respect to where it is in the cycle. And so if you want to turn, in this case, we're going to bank to the left. So there's more pitch on the right side, and there's less pitch on the left side, and that causes you to have an imbalance. Okay. Yeah, and this is just how wings work. This all seems straightforward to me because I had a student pilot license as a kid, and so I knew about lift and drag and all those things. But that's basically what it is. So the very 101 description of this is that the reason a wing lifts is because the distance over the top is larger than the distance over the bottom, and that means the air is flowing faster and it's a little bit thinner, and so there's a little bit of a kind of a suction or a push from the bottom, and then you can put in some tilt and you can get more of that. Okay, next. So there's the picture of the that thing there is the swash plate, and it has 3 servos on it, and you do some algorithm where you figure out you figure out how to put the swash plate for the way you want it. This is a very complicated analytical thing, and the chief pilot on this project was basically a master of the process of figuring out how to fly it. A human pilot of a human helicopter, they learn by training how to manipulate the controls to get what they want, and we had to learn by algorithm how to do this. This is all flown autonomously because the one-way light time to Mars is at least 10 minutes, so there's no way to joystick anything. Okay. And this is the real swash plate. Yeah, okay, that's better. And there's 2 of these, but this is basically all the little precision pieces. Okay, next. All right, so now that we know what a helicopter is, well, so our goal here was to fly a helicopter on another planet. And I won't get into the politics of this, but when we call something at NASA technology demonstration, that means that they don't want to spend much money on it. They just want a rousing success. And so this was a technology demonstration. And that meant that we didn't guarantee anything, things we really wanted to achieve, like being able to fly on another planet. And the basic timeline was that we went with the Perseverance rover, which left Florida on July 30th, 2020, to Mars on February 18th, 2021. And then when you get to Mars, as you all know, the day on Mars is a little bit different length from the day on Earth. And so we stop counting Earth time and we start counting Mars time. And the day you arrive is called Sol Zero. A sol is a day on Mars. And so now everything is in Mars time and Mars sols. So the helicopter was let off the bottom on Sol 43, which was a couple of months later. We fooled around for a while and had our first flight later in April. And the requirement, what we call the base requirement was to fly once, just to show that it could be done. What they really wanted to do was fly 5 times and try a few different things, just to show different things that would help inform future missions. And when it kept working, they kept flying until finally they managed to crash it on Flight 72 in January of last year. And we'll talk more about that later. And finally, this was of interest to me. So, well, we'll talk about the radio system because that's mostly what this is about. But after it crashed, it wouldn't fly anymore. but they could still talk to it as long as the rover and the helicopter are in radio range. And so they had what will probably have been the last radio contact in November. That says 2025, but it's really 2024 November. And it was at a range of 3 kilometers, which was much further than we designed for, but I figured would work if they did it right. So, and then we talked about the challenges already. There's nearly no air on Mars. It's 8 torr, for those of you who speak torrs. The big issue here was we had to make a helicopter that would work, that would fit on the existing rover that was going to go. And what that meant was that the biggest piece of it, which is the blade span, had to be 4 feet or less. And you could do anything you wanted as long as you didn't exceed that. And so the calculation was done to figure out how much lift can you get from a 4-foot blade in 8 torr at some RPM, where you're solving for the RPM. And that's where we got the 2800 RPM and so forth. Also, since there's nearly no mass in this air, there's nearly no density, the entire vehicle had to weigh less than 1.8 kilograms. That's about 5 pounds. And we were helped by the fact that the ground Mars is only about 8% of what it is here. But this is still 1.8 kilograms. On Mars, it was 500 grams. And so our very fancy and powerful rotor system was actually raising 500 or 600 grams off the surface. And it's cold. And what that means to electronics people is, and I'm sure you guys deal with this too, most electronics on Earth is built to operate in a range minus 40 to plus 85 C, which is pretty cold to pretty hot. And that means it could operate in the engine compartment of a car. It could operate in the Arctic on a good day. It rarely gets that warm on Mars. It rarely gets up to minus 40. And so there is the problem that all the, you could start up a program. This would cost money, right? You could start up a program to make electronics that would operate in the cold like this, but it would be hard to develop. It would be hard to test. You wouldn't know much about it. You wouldn't have much quantity. So everything would be expensive. And so what we wanted to do was just build it out of stuff that we had that works on Earth at Earth temperatures, and then somehow magically make that work on Mars. So what we ended up doing was most of the electronics, including my part of it, was in what's called a warm electronics box. That's basically some circuit boards with mylar around them and a heater inside. As long as the battery stayed up and we could keep it warm enough, and by warm enough we mean right at minus 40, which is right at the edge of what the electronics would do, but about as much as we could afford the energy for, then we could do this. So some of the electronics had to be out on the blades and things around the swash plate and so forth. Those all had heaters on them. You had to, part of the pre-flight was to turn on heaters and warm up stuff so that it would actually function correctly. And then there's the main thing that happens with electronics, and this happened to me in testing. When you get things cold, those little solder pads let go between the parts and the board, and then the thing stops working. And that's not good when you're at Mars. So that was the thing we mostly worried about. Yeah. Okay. So now we're into marketing. Me and the other people who worked on this project, we're not the only ones who said, what in the world are you doing this for? And so this is kind of the answer. It said, well, the first thing we did in the 60s, we sent things by Mars to take pictures, the early mariners. Then we sent orbiters that did global maps, and then we sent landers that looked at stuff, and then we sent rovers that looked at stuff and drove around to other places and looked at other stuff. And now we're talking about a new kind of vehicle that can go places where you couldn't drive to, basically. Now, this particular helicopter didn't really go to any place that you couldn't drive to, but the implications are obvious, right? There are places, down cliffs or into canyons or up on top of stuff that you couldn't easily or even possibly drive to. So that's one thing. And also you can look for different sorts of, you can do different sorts of science in the air than you can just from the ground. So it's just another tool, basically. The biologically sensitive one is interesting. There's places you wouldn't want to drive into and mess up everything, but maybe you could just touch down and then do something and then kind of leave carefully. I don't know. So we worked with a local company. What's the name of it? AeroVironment. Yes, AeroVironment. Right, the big word right there. AeroVironment was founded by Paul McReady, who's known for the Gossamer Condor and the Gossamer Albatross. These are human-powered vehicles. So they have all the same problems we have. They have a very limited power source, that is a human, who can barely produce enough energy or enough power to lift themselves in a properly configured vehicle. And there's a picture of Brian Allen, either before or after he went across the English Channel. That was the big achievement. I think it was in the 80s. And Brian Allen ended up working at JPL for a while. He retired before I did, but he was around, and he'd come to the bike club meetings, and we could talk to him about this and other things. So that was fun. And these guys, so the Paul McReady Company had the expertise that we didn't have in dealing with right on the very edge of could possibly work aero vehicles, and that's what we needed for this. And then JPL did all the management and the electronics and stuff like that. So, okay. So here we are. There was only 4 people who were allowed to actually touch the flight helicopter, and that's them plus another person. I don't know who any of those people are because I can't tell in this picture. Well, the tall guy is Teddy Xantos, and he figures in it. Okay, but this is it, built up, ready to go in July of 2019. Okay, and there they are, mounted on the bottom of the rover. This is the plate that goes on the bottom of the rover, and the purpose of this plate is that as the rover comes down on its landing, they're blowing up a lot of dirt and rocks and things. And this is just a nice plate, like a fender on the car, that's meant to prevent anything from getting damaged. And they said, oh, you can put your toy helicopter there. That's fine. So then over on the other side, the helicopter is covered by this thing called a pebble shield. That's a little fiberglass thing that basically kept us from getting pounded to death during the rover landing process. All right, go on. You've got yeah. So here we are in the clean room with the rover not exactly closed out, but this is pretty close to the end of the process. There's the rover wheels. There's the rover radiothermal generators. This is the plate that we're mounted on, and that's the helicopter right there. And this is how we were attached underneath there. And the reason I have this particular picture is because that's my antenna right there. That's the 900 megahertz antenna right by this thing we call the mousetrap. The way this comes off is that springs loose, and the helicopter is allowed to drop or swing down, as we will see in a moment. Right, so there it is. We got to Mars, and several days later they left the pebble shield in the dirt someplace and then drove away. Go on. Where's the next one? Is it not switching again? It is. Oh. There you go. All right. So this is a series of pictures that was taken showing the thing being put down. You see it just swinging down, and then the legs have to spring out, and then they have to lock into place. And once that's done, then you can fire the last bolt and let it drop, and then drive away. And we had this huge, lengthy discussion about which way to drive away. You know, it kind of amazed me how complicated this got, but the problem was they decided where they wanted to put it, and they decided that, you know, we thought the right thing to do was drop it off and then keep going, because that was the cleanest way to go. But they thought, well, we don't know what's out there where you're telling us to go. We want to back up to the place we've already been. So we had this lengthy, several-day argument about whether to go forward or go backward from that. And it turned out there was some cables down underneath that they thought might snag on our antenna, and then it would snag on the antenna and it would pull the helicopter up into the very expensive sample return canister hardware. And so they didn't want to do that. So we had to have a practice in the middle of the night. This is at the Mars yard at JPL, where they have a play-like rover and a play-like helicopter. And they went out there to see what happens if we drive forward, and it was fine. And so they drove forward, and here we are with a little bit of dirt on the solar panels, and we're ready to go, kind of. All right, so there's the first flight. There's two cameras on the helicopter. One looks straight down, and that's called the navigation camera. And the way the thing knows how to fly is that image, they pick up objects in the image, and you can see them here. These are rocks or features on the ground. You can also see rover tracks there. And it sees how those features move around in the image to decide how to move the helicopter around. So if you're supposed to stay put, then it flies in such a way as to make those features stay put. And if you're supposed to move some direction, then it flies in such a way as to make those features move in the other direction. And that is a key part. Without that working, we couldn't fly this thing at all. So it was important to know that the camera worked, and that's we flew around noontime on that first flight, and so here we are. That's the shadow of the helicopter about 3 meters above the ground. This is the second flight, viewed from far away by the rover sitting at a safe distance. And this, we actually got a picture of the rover from the helicopter. And so someone went around and said, oh, this is the first time a thing on Mars is taking a picture of another thing on Mars. I don't know that I believe that, but that was said anyway. All right. I always liked this one because you could see the tracks in the dirt that matched the plan. You can see where we took a little turn here and where it kind of backed up there. There's the helicopter right there. And when the helicopter's in flight, okay, so I said there's two cameras. There's one for navigation that looks straight down, and then there's the one that we call the return to Earth camera, and that's kind of the public relations camera, and it looks down at a 45-degree angle. The idea being that that's where you'll see things that are interesting. You know, if you look out at the horizon, you're not really seeing anything up close, and if the helicopter tilts, you might see nothing but sky. That wouldn't be good. If you're looking straight down, well, we already have one doing that. So this looked down at a 45-degree angle. And so most of the pictures you see from that camera, they have the feet, the landing feet on the edge of it. So you know that's what you're looking at, and that's the shadow there at the bottom. So on the fourth and fifth flight, on the fourth flight, we flew out for the very first time to a new place. You know, we had studied every pebble on this first place because we didn't want to break anything and we didn't want to land and have it not be level and all that. We went on the fourth flight and took pictures of a completely new and different place that we'd never surveyed before. And then on the fifth flight, they went out and landed in that new place, and that was a huge step. This is this was what I spent my days looking at during the flight part of the campaign. But this is basically a graph of radio performance during the flight. And I guess this is flight number 5. And what you see here, the important thing to me was the green line. That's the signal level. And before the flight starts, you know, here's the blades are spinning up and things are happening, but it's not actually in the air yet. And it's a pretty steady signal at that level, which I've called 30 over 9. That's ham speak for pretty loud. And then it takes off and the signal gets really good because now it's out of the ground clutter and it flies around and has different things happen. And then it lands someplace further away, so the signal's a little bit lower. It's only 20 over 9, which is still pretty loud in ham speak. And this actually has a translation into physics units that you can analyze the link. But the blue line shows how much data was transmitted, and that was basically everybody else's most interesting thing. I throttled it back to what we could actually handle, so that we got in flight. You never knew what was going to happen in a flight. Once you're in flying, that might be the last data you get, right? So they wanted to get everything live that they could, and then after the flight was over and you were safely on the ground, they offloaded some pictures and stuff, and that's what happened here. Okay. So this is a list of the flights that I was closely involved with. In fact, my retirement date was July 9th, 4 days after this 9th flight. And these were really for an engineering development, which is what that was my main focus here. Those were the interesting ones. Once it gets routine, they wouldn't pay me anymore, even if I did work there. So it either works and I don't hear anything, or it doesn't work and my phone is the first one to ring, and I have to say, well, you have to authorize me to work on this and provide a charge number and blah blah blah, and then we would go through all that. But these are all the ones while I was still working there, and these were the good ones. And I guess, yeah, we flew about 1 kilometer probably during that whole campaign. And this just kind of shows you what happened as things developed. I think this is the same group of flights, but viewed on a map. So the rover's driving around on the white line, and we're flying around this way. And see right there, there's a dune field that you couldn't drive across. See, they had to drive around that. So this is the example of what you can do with a helicopter that you couldn't do with the rover. But we had to stay within 1 kilometer or so just so we could continue to talk. All right, so this, I think I first gave this talk around 2017, back when we thought the helicopter would be a CubeSat and with rotor blades. Now, this is pretty much all the same stuff that we've already talked about. So we did pretty much achieve what we set out to achieve, but now we're looking at older stuff, and this just, we'll go through this more quickly, but this talks about the communication system itself. Yeah, we've talked about all that. Oh, but I will tell one thing about that. So when the helicopter was attached to the rover, it communicated over a serial line, and the radio could not even be activated. It was inhibited off. So there was no way to test it. There was no way to know from the time that they closed it out in Florida until we were dropped on Mars that the radio even worked. And so I basically got a vacation. And they talked to it over their piece of wire. Once it's dropped on Mars, the inhibit's turned off, and the only way to talk to it is over the radio. So now it has to work after all those months. And so I will say, how many ulcers do you get per day? My ulcer index was highest at that point when we were going to hear from it over the radio for the first time. It was, and of course it was 3 a.m. because these things always happen in the middle of the night. All right, so this was the original plan, and it's kind of like what we did. First, you just go up and down, then you go up and land nearby, and then you go do something brave and come back and land at the same place, and then you go off other places. And that's really kind of what happened. In fact, we ran out of money at the 4th flight, and they had to get a different kind of operational funding to continue for the rest of it. So, you know, the whole history of the project was they were waiting for us to crash and destroy the test helicopter from the very beginning. And as soon as that happened, it was going to all be over. You know, no more money for you guys. This was always crazy. And we never did it. We never could fail. So the goal I was given, we didn't have requirements. This is a government speak thing that I won't get into. But the goal I was given was to keep the whole radio system, including the antenna, down to 10 grams. And we nearly did that. What they really wanted was 0 grams, of course. They didn't have spare mass for anything in their 1800. They used a lot of it on batteries and stuff. They wanted us to communicate up to 1,000 meters. And, you know, we talked about the temperatures already. Now, who here knows what Zigbee is? Okay. So you know, it's a home automation thing. You would buy these parts, you'd put one in your refrigerator, you'd put one in your thermostat, they'd talk to your computer. It's a home automation thing, right? And if you were a hobbyist rolling your own, this is how you would do it. And Zigbee was a protocol for that. And we had people call us up and say, isn't Zigbee for this? You're building a house on Mars? And I said, no, we're using what came in the parts because we didn't build these parts. We just buy them and use them the way they are. Okay, go on. So one of the things we did, there was 2 radios. There's one on the rover and there's one on the helicopter. And this is because the helicopter does not talk directly to the Earth. Only the rover has the ability to talk to the Earth. And so the rover talks to the helicopter. All the data comes through the rover. It's stored on the rover. And then the rover sends it all back to the Earth as part of its daily routine. And we built 2 identical sets, one to go on the helicopter and one to go on the rover. And this made it easy so that things were swappable and so forth. There was no need to make them any different. And they're on 900 megahertz, as I mentioned. All right. And this was the criteria we used to pick the part. So this is a little bit of radio speak, but we had to keep it down to 10 grams. We build radios at JPL to go into space. The smallest one we had was 400 grams. So that was a non-starter. We just had to buy something off the shelf. The reason we use 900 megahertz is because what you can get off the shelf, this is the lowest frequency you can get off the shelf. And the reason we wanted the lowest frequency was because when you do omnidirectional antenna to omnidirectional antenna, lower frequency will go further because of the physics of it. We could have been 2.4 or 5.7. They would have had, it would have scaled. The 1,000 meters would have been 200 meters or whatever. Also, these things, we could get them in 1 watt versions. Most of your computers, your Wi-Fi stuff is a few tens of milliwatts. And so 1 watt is a lot of power for a home automation type of part. And so we wanted high power ones. And we also wanted the ability to use more than 1 antenna, although after much deliberation, we ended up using 1 antenna anyway. But these had the ability to do more than 1. And this is what we ended up buying, these little $60 units made by a company called Cyflex that immediately was bought out by a Canadian firm, and that would be a problem unless you were on a government project that's not allowed to work with foreign distributors. And so just as soon as we placed the order for these things, they went out of stock and then they went out of business. And the only people we could talk to were in Canada, which we weren't allowed to talk to. It would have been possible, but you'd have to be there. Let's see. We bought 50 of them to start with. We took parts off of them to make them even lighter. They started out at 5 grams. We made them 3.5. Puts out nearly a watt. And it'll run nearly 0.5 megabit per second, which was nice. We ended up not using all of that, but over the serial line. Looks like, and that's the scale. The very first thing that's built on the helicopter is the mast that goes up the middle that has the blades on the top and the warm electronics box on the bottom, and it has all the wires that go between anything in it. And the biggest, fattest wire in there was my antenna cable. And so this is a picture of that being built up. Let's see. Oh, yeah, someone suggested, well, this is a helicopter. Why don't you put the antenna on the bottom, right? And we thought about that, and we thought, well, most of the radio communication is not going to be in flight. And even what is in flight, they're going to require us to park so far away that it's really going to be just basically vertical. It's like mobile to mobile. So we put it on top, and that was the right thing to do. And it put us up on the solar panel, which gave us a nice ground plane, which also helped with the antenna. All right. And there it is. Actually, I call this my antenna, but really Nasser Shahat built it. Now, if you know antennas, you would realize that this isn't a very fancy thing. It's just a quarter wave whip. And at 900 megahertz, the wavelength is 33 centimeters. And so a quarter wave is 8 centimeters. So and that's about 3 inches. But it has this little pigtail in it. Not because that does anything. It does change the radio performance of it, and we had to allow for that. But that's not why it's there. It's because when it was captured underneath the rover, if this was a full 3 inches long, that would touch the metal bottom of the rover and score it, and that's not permittable. So we had to make it just a tiny bit shorter for that. This is where the base station is. If you see pictures of the rover in the news, you can sometimes find this antenna and this box where the rover end radio is, and there it is before it's deployed. The helicopter underneath. All right, and this just shows a closer up with the cabling. Keep going. Yes, so this is one of my favorite pretty pictures. This is the little unit that we prepared. We spent a lot of effort making this 5 gram thing into a 3 gram thing that was ready to fly to Mars. And this is the board that we put it down on that was provided by another subsystem. And that's our little antenna connector right there. And I can tell you most of what these pieces are. You probably wouldn't be that interested, but the way the helicopter electronics was built up, I think there's 5 or 6 boards, and they are actually arranged into a cube. I think this is the next slide where it talks about this is a test bed layout of that's my board there with my radio on it, and this is the next board, and this is the next one. And you can imagine, these are all cabled together, and this is all a test bed that actually functions, and so you can test software and things like that. And you can imagine circling these up into a square, and then this is the bottom, and that would be a cubicle form, and that's the way it was put together for the helicopter. And then this same arrangement was folded into a wallet-like setup to take even less space on the rover side in the rover base station box. All right, so don't know. So we did hack the firmware quite a bit. This would not interoperate with any other Zigbee unit that exists or ever will exist. It's really our own thing. But of importance here, there was 2 data rates available officially, and we made 3 modes out of that. And for weakest signals, for greatest distance, we were restricted to 20 kilobits per second. And by the time you get through the protocol and all the handshaking and everything, that ends up with 9 kilobits per second is moving between side and the other. And then the higher rate is a more complicated, higher power waveform that'll go 250 kilobits per second, but we were only get 80. And we offered them a mode where it didn't have to use the protocol and interact. It would just start transmitting everything that it wanted to. And we called that vomit mode. And we could get up to 200 kilobits per second, but they would never use that, because to use that, when I say the helicopter would transmit only, that means they'd lose control, right? You don't have the ability while the helicopter's transmitting to tell it to quit. And in these other modes, you do. This 9 times out of 10, the helicopter is transmitting, but then it'll listen for one cycle and see if the rover wants it to do something. And if you want to turn it off, or you want to tell it to change gears, or you want to tell it anything, then you can do that. And so they never would let us do anything but be completely safe. This just shows us out in the Arroyo by JPL doing field test with this. This is an antenna in a vacuum chamber. We put these things in vacuum chambers and we didn't pump them down to vacuum like you do most spacecraft. We pumped them down to 8 torr, right? So that we could play like we were on Mars. And that led to a great deal of entertainment when you have a vacuum in a vacuum chamber, then it's pretty isolated. And the fact that you've got the temperature down at 50 below doesn't propagate out to the wall of the chamber. But if you're at 8 torr, it does. So we're at 8 torr at low zero and shipping. And so all of our feed throughs and all of our electronics on our bench outside starts to get water on it. And that's, I don't know, that excited me. I don't know. I guess, well, no, astronomers don't go out when it's going to be raining, right? So you try to keep water out of your stuff too, right? Yeah, okay. Yeah, keep going. This is just the test bed. All right. I did some testing to see if the power out really worked. And the important thing on this picture, this direction is the power setting, direction is the power output, and the different colors are different parts that we tested. So you can see there's some variability between the parts, and so this is part of how we decided which parts to send to Mars and which parts to keep here for testing. I think we sent the best receivers to Mars, and the transmitters, I think we were a little bit lucky with them too. And this is the receiving performance. This is important. So at the lower data rate, we get down to, this is thousandths of a nanowatt, and you can still recover data. At the higher rate, it's about 10 times worse. But it was very important to us to know what these curves were so that we could predict how far we could go and other things like that. And this is the same thing. I'd want to make sure we were on frequency. And this is the basic throughput of the different modes. Same thing. Keep going. This is a scope plot of our waveform. This is the low data rate one and the high data rate one. That's actual testing data. Keep going. So one of the most entertaining, this is entertaining in retrospect. It was terrifying in the moment. We got some really high level attention with JPL management at one point, about 2 years before launch, when they decided that this might not work for some reason. And so various subsystem leads, me included, were called into very high level meetings to present why we thought it would work. And I didn't know whether it would work or not, so I didn't necessarily even think that. But we did do a lot of study and we did make some plots. And this basically shows what the antenna pattern was. We didn't like this. We would like to have something smoother and higher, but this is what we were given. You know, we were a thing that was added on. We were the thing that the rover didn't even want to take to Mars with them because we made their life harder and more risky. And so, you know, we took what we could get. We weren't even allowed to talk to them until about 18 months before launch. They thought we would crash and it'd just all be over. And so, keep going. Yeah, so this just shows the electrical performance of the antenna. So these plots, these are where we were trying to sell upper management that we could do this. You see, the thing is, you say you can communicate up to 1 kilometer, and maybe you can, but that's if all the antennas are oriented in such a way that that it supports that. And there are cases where it doesn't. So what this means, green is good, red is low data rate, and white doesn't work at all. And so I ended up putting this little swimming pool size thing in here saying, well, you know, for the 5 flights, you could just fly them all in that box and it would work. You know, and if you're unlucky and you're over here, well, you know, you can turn the rover a little bit so that it's over here and then it would work. And so that was my basic argument. And, you know, finally, after a few days of this, some of the cooler heads in the highest levels of management looked at us and says, yeah, you guys are doing the best you can. Helicopter has a lot bigger problems than you, so get out of here and go back to work. This is the same thing from in flight. So in flight is much better, as we saw in the earlier plots. And we were trying to sell them on 2 antennas. And so this and the next slide are a comparison. It wasn't worth the extra 2 grams to get that much improvement. And so we just flew 1 antenna and played like we didn't have the other one. All right. So here we are. So this was a fun day. We went out in the Arroyo, which is the dry creek bed next to JPL, and we took this play-like rover. This was the thing they built in 2012 to test the radar system for the rover that went in 2012. And so I commandeered it, and we put our stuff on there and played like it was a rover. And then we had this plastic model that we built up, and we put some tin foil on that, and we played like it was a helicopter, and we took it several tens of meters away. And we tried to talk back and forth, and we had some problems that day, but it generally was pretty good, and it was a photo op for things. So in the end, we ended up building 3 helicopters. 1 went to Mars. 1 was used for flight testing in the big 80-foot chamber, the 25-foot chamber at JPL. They'd pump it down to 8 torr and they'd fly the helicopter in it. And 1 was used to test the environment. This is the number 2 test helicopter that took down to the cold temperatures and the hot temperatures and played like we were in space and so forth. And then once they got off, you know, so we had far exceeded our goals when, you know, we'd had a lot more than 5 flights. We were up in a few dozen by now. when one day they decided to fly off out of range and they lost touch with the helicopter and my phone rang. And I said, well, you know, the only thing I've consistently told you for the last 4 years is that if you land behind something, it won't talk. So sorry, drive till you can see it and then call me back. And so after several weeks, they did that. We funded an effort to actually do a real propagation study, which is kind of comparable to what radio mobile is for radio on Earth. Right. So this was go back. This was the entertaining to me. So after I retired, you know, occasionally someone would come up to me and say, "Oh, what's the matter with the helicopter?" And I wouldn't know because I don't work here anymore. And even if I did work here, I wouldn't be an insider anymore. And so I would go look around, and they would say, "Well, such and such happened. The helicopter had trouble, but then they reestablished communication." And at that point, I would always say, "Well, you're welcome." Okay. So here's what happened at the end. It crashed on flight 72. Now, flight 71, they were flying over a sand field that didn't have much in features. And we said at the beginning that navigation camera that's looking straight down, it needs to have features in it to see the features moving so that we know that we're flying and we know how to orient the blades and stuff. All right, so they were flying in flight 71, they were flying over this featureless sand field, and the algorithm said, I don't see any features. There must be something wrong. Land now. And so this was one of two cases where we actually got to do this emergency land now thing, where it basically shuts off stuff and lets it come down wherever it is, and then we do our best to recover from there. All right, so we came down in the sand field, and it sat there for a while, and then communication was recovered. You're welcome. And then they wanted to figure out where it was. And so they scheduled flight 72, which was a pop-up flight. That was so they could pop up and actually look for it. And the pop-up flight suffered from the same thing that the flight 71 had. There was still no features underneath it. And as it was flying up, it saw its own shadow, and it thought its own shadow was a feature. And it started tracking that, trying to act like that was sitting still, but it wasn't because the shadow's moving over here with the sun. And so it tilted over to try to follow its shadow, and then a blade dug into the ground. And according to the people who run the power system, that's a guaranteed brownout. Once the blade is in the ground, the motor is basically shorted and the batteries all go to zero, and that flight is over no matter what happens mechanically. Right, okay, go on. So here's the pictures, and this is pretty cool. Here we are. The helicopter that used to have 4 blades appears to have 1. It could have 3. We're not sure how it's oriented here, but one of the blades is over here. So that's pretty much not flight worthy anymore. But of course, the radio's still working. And so what they did, and what we summarized in the last flight, in the last slide was, well, they said, okay, it's over. We can't fly anymore. But it's still working electrically. And so we'll let it sit there and take data. We'll let it be a weather station. We'll let it just do stuff. And when the rover is close enough, it can talk over the radio and get that data, whatever value it might have. And like I said at the beginning, I think the last time that happened was in November at a range of 3 kilometers. They drove the rover up on a hill where they could see it, and they talked for a minute, and it made the news. And I think that's the last time, because the rover's moving on to other parts of Mars now. And so I believe it's over, but I don't know. And I think everything else here, yeah, keep going. Oh, so this is the team. This is Teddy Xantos, the tall guy who you saw in the clean room. This is Bob Belleram. He's a physicist. This was basically his idea. He said, let's build a helicopter that would fly on Mars, and he made it happen. This is the project manager. She was poached by Amazon. She now works on their competitor with Starlink. We haven't heard from her lately. They get pretty busy there. This is Hovard. He is the chief pilot. He's the brains behind making the thing fly like it ought to fly. And he keeps an actual logbook, you know, the little logbooks that have the flights in them that you would have if you were a pilot. He has one. And these other two guys are bureaucrats. Okay, so this is my favorite quote, and I think this applies to anyone who does anything close to engineering. Hardware eventually fails. Go on. Software eventually works. And so obviously what this means is, you know, this is always the thing we're doing at JPL. You know, we'll launch some hardware into space, and rarely is the software working yet. And eventually it does. And we try to get it to where the software works before the hardware fails. And sometimes we do that too. And that kind of happened here. So I think the rest of this is just pictures of me and my microwave radio stuff. Yeah. And there's me and my grandson and my daughter. And there's some other stuff, but that's pretty much it. Any questions or comments or complaints? Yes. Yes. So that one's pretty easy, right? But when you're going to go someplace else, like they started doing on Flight 5, well, that's not easy because you don't know where you're going to go. And so there is some smarts in the navigation picture analysis. You know, they wouldn't land on something that they could determine was dangerous. But not every picture of something dangerous looks that way, right? I mean, so you could, yeah, so you could certainly fail. And you know, in the big, you know, all failures are investigated to the hilt on these things. In the big investigation at the end, when there was no real loser because we had exceeded the goal by a factor of 14 or something, they did say, yeah, that this was a known weakness in the algorithm, and you know, it was a technology demonstration. It wasn't supposed to cost much money, and we knew that if we flew over something without features, that would happen. And so, sure. Yeah. So the question about the 10-minute delay, and this varies from 5 to 20 minutes depending on where Mars is, right? Uh, and that's one way. So it's two ways when you're trying to joystick something, right? So yes, so basically the cadence of all this is that there are orbiters around Mars that pass over all the missions, including this one, and pick up their data on UHF every day. And then later on in their orbit, they send that data back to the Earth. And then during the Mars night, for your mission, whatever that is, the team here looks at all that and decides what to do tomorrow. And so that's when the decisions are made about where are we going to fly and what are we going to try to do? And are we going to try to go to this new place? And have we looked at that enough or whatever? You know, all those, that's all done then. And then the end of that shift, then there's a deadline at which you have to turn in all the commands for tomorrow, and they're sent via the DSN up to Mars, and then down from orbit to the rover, and then from the rover to the helicopter, and then the moment comes, and if it works, then you do the thing for that day, and if anything goes wrong, then you don't. And what happens is when you all come to work the next Mars night, you say, oh, we didn't do anything today. A whole day is lost. this didn't seem to bother anybody. But it is, the scientists have looked at this. They've said, we send rovers to Mars, and it takes them about a day to do what a team of geologists just walking across that same area could do in about 5 minutes. And the same thing here. Everything is on days. We have just a little bitty goal to get done tomorrow. And if it happens, then we move on. And if it doesn't, if it happens, we move on, and it's several days till we can decide what the next thing will be. All that deciding is done on the Earth. And, with whatever information we have, as little as that is. Yeah, until 12 hours later. There are modes where you can talk back to the Earth. You can only have 10 minutes of delay, not half a day, but they're pretty expensive. So we don't use them much. Yeah. Did I hear somebody in Zoom land?
Yeah, let me remind people that they can ask questions in the Q&A section, and we'll be asking so.
Okay. Yes.
And Courtney, if you could repeat the questions in person for the online audience, that would be great too.
Okay. Yeah, so the first question is, what is the configuration of the blades? And somehow I missed this. It's in there. So, the helicopters used to have a big tail, and there's a thing on the end that does this. And we didn't want that, right? Because that's a whole lot more space. So this is a counter-rotating design, and there's a lower and an upper, and they rotate in opposite directions. So the net torque is 0, no matter what you're doing. And further, the lower one only gets collective. All the cyclic, all the steering is done from the upper one. And it's, that's just for simplification, basically. But yeah, it's a 0 torque situation. Yes. Yeah, so the question is, we used a lot of COTS, which means commercial off-the-shelf parts, and that didn't used to be standard in the space business for a lot of reasons. The full answer to that is extremely long and complicated. The short answer is that, they don't really make space grade parts anymore. There's not enough market, even with the military involved, to make that high rel stuff. And so in the last 15 years of my career, we spent a lot of time transitioning into a world where we just take what we can buy and we just figure out how to make it work, and we figure out what's going to break, and we try to anticipate that and deal with it somehow. But it's not like the old days, even on the rover. I mean, there are some parts that are still legacy, and they're still 30-year-old designs and things, and you still have some rad hard things, for example, but nothing on the helicopter. So this is a whole new world. Right. That's the short answer. Yeah. Yeah, and what you would like to do, you'd like to buy a whole bunch of them and test a whole bunch of them and see what the statistics are. And of course, that's expensive, and it takes a lot of time and people. And so you don't always do that, but you always do something kind of like that. So, you do the best you can. Right.
We have some questions online.
Yes, go ahead.
Leon?
Oh, sure. Hi there. Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. I'm not sure if you can see what is on my webcam right now, but this is live video from the International Space Station from my camera that I operate. It's a 4K external camera. And we have grand designs to. It's a COTS system as well. It's really new capability. Okay. And the question is, I can't imagine what it must have been like for you to receive the first video from the helicopter that got there because of your creation of the amazing radio transmitters. And I think, is it right? You had 80 kilobits per second for the video. Is that right?
Right.
Yeah,
So this is not real-time video, right?
of course.
This is a bunch of pictures that are taken and some thumbnails are downloaded and then full images later on. It takes hours to get
Right.
to
Okay.
get
So
those
the
pictures.
process
Yeah.
is it gets stored on board the helicopter and then transferred to the rover and then transmitted to the in-space infrastructure and then sent to the Earth. Is that the way it
Yes.
goes?
Yes, that's the way it goes.
That's the way it
So
goes.
so the way the rover was the way the helicopter was handled by the rover, we were just another scientific instrument to them. And so we got a certain connection. We got a voltage, we got some power, we got some bandwidth for data. We got the other connections that other scientific instruments get. And then in our little world, where my radio and the two computers on both ends of that link were, um, stuff would sit on the helicopter until they could get it off, and then it would go into the memory on the rover side, where we kept it until us as the instrument was allowed to send it back to the Earth. And we were subject to the same prioritization system that everybody else is. If
Got
somebody
it.
wants to go off and look at that rock, and we want to fly, well, someone makes the decision who goes today and who goes tomorrow. It's just that simple.
Understood. Understood. So I just want to say, uh, just acknowledge the amazing work that you made possible through that. It was just, yeah. I know it was a what do you call it? It was a technology demonstration, so it
Yes.
really didn't have to do it. Didn't have to come through, right? I mean, that was sort of. But nevertheless, it just
Yeah,
what you did
we
showed the way. It was, and it's inspired me with everything I've been doing.
so I had lunch with some former colleagues today, and we were discussing this very phenomena. And basically, they want to spend less money on it, and they want to take more risk, but it can't fail. We still want the results, right? So, and I had a comment on this radio was no act of genius. This is just an off-the-shelf thing. I mean, the effort here was to take something every day and put it into this special use and get it to work. And the worst day for me was the day one of these failed at low temperature in lab testing. We were cycling to see what they would do, and one of them came up not working, and it was just a solder pad had opened up, and I said, yeah, if I could go to Mars and just squeeze it between my fingers, I could get it working
Mhm.
again. But that I I got more gray hair from that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that's the real story of making something work with limited
Right.
funds, and but still have the spotlight on you. And I definitely, on my side, we have plans to go from the space station to Mars. In fact, we're on a call next week with the NASA Artemis team to consider flying our low cost, sort of somewhat off the shelf, put together but custom designed to the moon. And I'm curious, do you have any recommendations for how we can present that kind of idea uh, without the resources of NASA and JPL, to have the capabilities of having a reliable system in a high radiation environment, and all of those
Right.
challenges?
So the short answer to that is no, I don't have any recommended pitch. Um, and I spent the last half of my career trying to figure out how to do that. And I think the best advice I could give is to know your audience, know what they understand and what they don't, and play into what they know. And be honest with them about what is and isn't going to work to the best of
Hmm.
your knowledge.
and just hope for the best. I was always one trying to be honest.
Me too. That I really
So-
love that. Thank you so much. Although you didn't have, you said you didn't have a lot to offer. That was a great bit of mentoring there. So thank you so much.
All right, I'm handing this back to Doug.
Okay, good. Well, Courtney, thank you very much for coming tonight and sharing a great depth of knowledge on a very interesting adventure. So your temptation is going to be to hang around and talk to your friends. Let's do that at Norms. How many people are interested in going to Norms so we can make kind of a reservation? Oh, good. Nobody. All right. All right. Thank you very much for coming tonight. And I think, are going to have another auction raffle next month. So bring your friends.
Okay, thank you. I would like to also thank all the people online for attending. We'll see you all next month. Bye-bye, everybody.